My son told me I was wasting everyone's time showing up to the will reading. I'm Annalise Hartford, 73 years old, and I'm about to tell you why those words were the last mistake Donovan would ever make in his entitled life. You see, my boy thought he knew everything about his father's $40 million empire, how brilliant Sterling Hartford built Apex Industries from nothing while his pathetic mother scraped by on food stamps and dollar store reading glasses. But when that estate lawyer cleared his throat to read the will, Donovan's perfectly constructed world was about to shatter into a million irreparable pieces. I sat in that mahogany-paneled office on the 42nd floor of the Whitmore building in downtown Seattle, feeling completely out of place in my 15-year-old navy cardigan. The leather chairs probably cost more than my entire monthly Social Security check. Donovan sat across from me in his custom Armani suit, his Rolex catching the afternoon sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. He scrolled through his phone with theatrical boredom, occasionally glancing at me with that look of pure contempt I'd grown accustomed to over the past 2 decades since the divorce. The lawyer, a distinguished man named Gregory Ashworth with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, organized documents on his desk with meticulous precision. Donovan's wife, a former beauty queen named Cecilia, sat beside him whispering something that made him smirk cruelly in my direction. My hands trembled slightly as I clutched my worn leather purse, the one I'd carried for 12 years because I couldn't afford to replace it. I'd taken 2 buses to get here, leaving my studio apartment in the shabby part of Tacoma at dawn to arrive on time. That's when Donovan leaned forward across the polished conference table, his eyes glittering with malicious satisfaction, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "I honestly don't know why you bothered coming, Mother. Dad made it crystal clear in his final years that you would get absolutely nothing. You were erased from this family the moment you signed those divorce papers. This is just a formality before I take control of everything he built." His words hit me like physical blows, each syllable designed to humiliate and diminish me in front of these witnesses. I didn't respond. I'd learned long ago that arguing with Donovan only fed his cruelty, gave him the reaction he desperately craved. Instead, I sat perfectly still, my weathered hands folded in my lap, and waited. Gregory Ashworth's expression remained professionally neutral, but I caught something flickering in his eyes, something that might have been pity or perhaps anticipation. He adjusted his glasses, pulled a thick leather folder toward him, and said in a measured tone that seemed to carry weight beyond the words, "Before we begin with the formal reading, I must first address a personal letter." Donovan's confident smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. Cecilia stopped whispering and sat up straighter, her perfectly manicured hand reaching for her husband's arm. The air in that office suddenly felt heavy, charged with an electricity I couldn't quite name. Gregory opened the folder with deliberate slowness, revealing what appeared to be handwritten pages on Sterling's personal stationery, the expensive kind with his initials embossed in gold. My heart pounded so hard I thought everyone in the room could hear it hammering against my ribs. If you've ever been underestimated by your own family, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because what happens next will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you've never heard a story quite like this one. Let me take you back to where this nightmare truly began, to the year 2003, when my entire world came crashing down in a single devastating afternoon. I was 53 years old, married for 32 years to Sterling Hartford, and I genuinely believed we would grow old together in our beautiful colonial house in Mercer Island. We had built a life, raised our son Donovan, and I thought our partnership was unbreakable. How catastrophically wrong I was about everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the man sleeping beside me every night. Sterling had founded Apex Industries 15 years earlier, manufacturing specialized industrial equipment, and the company had recently exploded in value after securing several massive government contracts. I had been there from the beginning, managing the books from our kitchen table, answering phones, organizing his schedule, doing payroll for our first 6 employees. While Sterling handled the engineering and business development, I kept the entire operation running smoothly behind the scenes. Nobody saw my contributions, but they were absolutely essential to every early success that company achieved. Then came the day Sterling walked into our bedroom where I was folding laundry and said with chilling casualness, "I've met someone else. Her name is Desiree. She's 29. I'm moving out tomorrow, and my lawyer will contact you about the divorce." Just like that. 32 years of marriage dismissed in 3 cold sentences delivered while I held his freshly pressed dress shirts. I remember dropping the shirt I was holding, my legs giving out, sitting down hard on the bed as the room spun around me in dizzying circles. The divorce proceedings were absolutely brutal, designed to crush me into accepting whatever scraps Sterling's expensive attorneys decided to throw my way. They painted me as a homemaker who had contributed nothing of value to his success, who had simply enjoyed the fruits of his genius while contributing nothing meaningful. Despite my years of unpaid labor building Apex from nothing, despite the sacrifices I made raising Donovan alone while Sterling traveled constantly, I walked away with only the bare minimum settlement. $200,000, the old Ford sedan, and absolutely no claim to the company I helped build from our kitchen table. Donovan was 17 when his father left, a senior in high school, and I watched in helpless horror as Sterling systematically poisoned our son against me. Sterling bought Donovan a Porsche for his 18th birthday, paid for his education at Yale, set him up in a penthouse apartment in Manhattan. He told Donovan elaborate lies about our marriage, painting me as lazy, unintelligent, and responsible for holding him back from even greater success. Donovan eagerly embraced this narrative because it came packaged with wealth, status, and his father's approval he'd always desperately craved. By the time Donovan graduated college with his economics degree, he had completely cut me out of his life except for obligatory holiday phone calls that lasted less than 5 minutes. He went to work for Apex Industries, became Sterling's protege and heir apparent, and began posting photos on social media of his extravagant lifestyle. Meanwhile, I moved into a modest apartment in Tacoma, took a job as a receptionist at a dental office making $11 an hour, and watched from a distance as my son transformed into someone I barely recognized anymore. Speech balloon. Can you imagine being erased by your own child? If this story is hitting you emotionally, smash that like button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below, have you ever been betrayed by someone you loved unconditionally? Keep watching, because karma is coming. The years after the divorce were the hardest of my entire life, and I want you to understand exactly what struggling really means when you're starting over at 53 with nothing. My $200,000 settlement seemed substantial until I calculated how long it needed to last without any real job prospects or retirement savings. I rented a cramped studio apartment for $800 monthly in a neighborhood where car alarms went off constantly and the hallways smelled like cigarette smoke and mildew that never quite went away. I worked at that dental office for 6 years, answering phones, filing insurance claims, and scheduling appointments while my feet ached in cheap shoes I couldn't afford to replace. Dr. Morrison was kind enough, but the pay barely covered my rent, utilities, and groceries. I clipped coupons religiously, bought generic everything, and learned to make one rotisserie chicken last an entire week through creative leftover recipes. Meanwhile, Donovan posted photos from Monaco, from ski resorts in Aspen, from exclusive restaurants where a single meal cost more than my monthly food budget. Then came 2015, when I discovered a lump in my breast during a routine self-examination that filled me with ice-cold terror. The mammogram confirmed my worst fears, early-stage breast cancer requiring immediate surgery and treatment. My insurance through the dental office was catastrophically inadequate, leaving me facing nearly $30,000 in out-of-pocket medical expenses I absolutely did not have. I lay awake night after night, staring at my ceiling, trying to figure out how to save my life without losing everything I had left. I called Donovan for the first time in 2 years, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone steady. I explained the situation, the cancer, the costs, and asked if he could possibly loan me $15,000 that I would pay back over time. The silence that followed my request seemed to stretch for an eternity before he finally spoke. His voice was cold, clinical, completely devoid of any recognizable human compassion or concern for his own mother's life. "Mom, I can't be expected to bail you out of your poor financial planning and life choices. He continued, "Dad has been incredibly generous with me because I've shown ambition and responsibility. You made your choices when you settled for that divorce agreement. Maybe if you had been more financially savvy or actually contributed something valuable to Dad's business, you wouldn't be in this situation now. I have my own expenses, my own life to think about. I simply can't afford to fund your mistakes." Then he hung up before I could respond, leaving me sitting on my threadbare couch, staring at the phone in my trembling hand, trying to process that my own son had just refused to help save my life. I sold everything of value I owned, my mother's antique jewelry, my wedding china, even my car, and borrowed the rest from a predatory payday loan company at 28% interest. I survived the surgery and treatment, but the financial and emotional scars cut far deeper than any surgeon's scalpel ever could. I was 71 years old, broken, alone, and completely erased from the family I had sacrificed everything to build and nurture for decades. If Donovan's coldness made your blood boil, you're not alone. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications because this story takes a turn you will not see coming. Drop a crying face in the comments if you've ever felt completely abandoned. The best part is still ahead, keep watching. In March, I received a phone call that would change everything, though I didn't understand its significance at the time. I was working my shift at the dental office, filing patient records in the back room, when my cell phone rang with an unknown Seattle number. I almost didn't answer because unknown numbers usually meant collection agencies or scammers, but something compelled me to pick up on the fourth ring. The voice on the other end was male, professional, and asked if I was Annalise Hartford, formerly married to Sterling Hartford of Apex Industries. My heart immediately began racing with anxiety because unexpected calls about Sterling never brought good news into my carefully controlled little world. The man identified himself as Gregory Ashworth, a senior estate attorney at Whitmore & Associates, one of Seattle's most prestigious law firms. He said Sterling had recently been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer and had perhaps 6 months to live. The words hit me with unexpected force, not grief exactly, but something complicated and unnameable that twisted in my chest. Despite everything, he was once the man I loved, the father of my child. Gregory continued in his measured professional tone, "Mr. Hartford has requested that I contact you regarding his estate planning. He would like to schedule a confidential meeting with you at your earliest convenience. He specifically asked that Donovan not be informed of this meeting or any of our communications." I was completely bewildered, suspicious even, wondering if this was some elaborate cruel joke Sterling was playing on me from his deathbed. Why would he want to see me after 20 years of complete silence and systematic erasure from his life? I agreed to the meeting more out of curiosity than anything else, taking a personal day from work that I couldn't really afford. I rode 2 buses to downtown Seattle, wearing my best dress, a simple gray one I'd bought at Goodwill for $12. Gregory Ashworth's office was everything you'd expect from a top-tier estate attorney: thick carpets, original artwork, and furniture that whispered old money and established power. He was perhaps 65, distinguished, with kind eyes behind his wire-rimmed glasses that immediately put me slightly at ease despite my nervousness. He explained that Sterling had very specific and unusual wishes regarding his will, and that he had been documenting certain facts and circumstances over the past several months. Gregory couldn't reveal details yet because Sterling was still alive and technically still his client, with attorney-client privilege protecting their communications. But he asked me detailed questions about the early years of Apex Industries, about my contributions, about the divorce settlement, and about my relationship with Donovan. I answered honestly, though I couldn't fathom where this was leading or what possible purpose it served now. As I prepared to leave, Gregory placed his hand gently on my arm and said something I'll never forget: "Mrs. Hartford, I've practiced estate law for 42 years, and I've learned that people often seek to correct their greatest regrets when facing mortality. Whatever you believe about Sterling, about your marriage, about everything that's happened, I think you should prepare yourself for some significant surprises when the time comes." I rode those 2 buses home in confused silence, Gregory's cryptic words echoing in my mind, wondering what Sterling could possibly be planning. "Is your jaw on the floor yet?" Subscribe now because you need to see what Sterling put in that will. Comment karma if you think Donovan is about to get exactly what he deserves. The next chapter reveals something absolutely shocking. Don't you dare click away now. Sterling Hartford died on a cold January morning in 2024, and I learned about it not from a phone call but from a news alert on my phone while I was drinking instant coffee in my tiny kitchen. Industrial magnate Sterling Hartford dies at 73, leaves $40 million empire, the headline screamed, accompanied by a photo of him looking distinguished and powerful in his perfectly tailored suit. I sat down at my small table and just stared at that photo for a long time, feeling nothing and everything simultaneously, mourning not the man he became but the one I once believed him to be. Donovan called me 3 hours later, and the viciousness in his voice was even worse than I'd anticipated or prepared myself for. I'm calling because it would look bad if I didn't, but let me be absolutely clear, you are not welcome at the funeral. Dad was very specific about that in his final wishes. You were nothing to him, you contributed nothing to his success, and frankly your presence would be an insult to his memory and everything he built. He paused, and I could hear him breathing heavily, working himself into greater anger. The reading of the will is next Tuesday at 10 a.m. at Whitmore & Associates. You can attend that because apparently the lawyer insists, but don't expect anything. Dad told me personally that you would receive nothing because you deserve nothing. This is just a formality. I wanted to tell him how much his cruelty hurt, wanted to ask when my sweet boy had transformed into this monster who could speak to his own mother with such venom. But I knew from bitter experience that confrontation only made things worse, gave him ammunition and satisfaction. So I simply said, I'll be there, Donovan, and hung up before he could say anything else designed to wound me even deeper. I sat alone in my apartment for the rest of that day, not crying exactly, but feeling a profound sense of grief for everything I'd lost, my husband, my son, my entire life. The funeral was held at an exclusive chapel in Seattle that probably cost more than most people's weddings, and true to his word, Donovan had made certain I wasn't on any guest list or notification. I watched the live stream on my laptop instead, seeing hundreds of people gathering to celebrate Sterling's life and legacy. Business leaders, politicians, society figures, all dressed impeccably and speaking eloquently about his vision, his genius, and his tremendous contributions to American industry and innovation. Nobody mentioned that a woman named Annalise had been beside him for 32 years, helping him build the foundation of everything they were celebrating. Donovan gave a eulogy that was both touching and infuriating, speaking about his father's mentorship, his incredible business acumen, and his dedication to building something lasting and meaningful. My father taught me that success requires vision, sacrifice, and surrounding yourself with people who elevate you rather than hold you back, Donovan said, his voice cracking with emotion. He showed me through his own example that sometimes you have to make hard decisions and cut away dead weight to achieve your true potential. I knew that Barb was aimed directly at me, calling me dead weight in front of hundreds of mourners and thousands watching online. The week between the funeral and the will reading crawled by with agonizing slowness while I tried to manage my expectations and anxiety. Gregory Ashworth had called to confirm my attendance and to cryptically say, "Mrs. Hartford, please make absolutely certain you're present on Tuesday. What happens that day will be significant." I barely slept, replaying decades of memories, Sterling's abandonment, Donovan's transformation, and wondering what possible significance there could be for a woman who'd already lost everything that mattered. But I would show up, if only to demonstrate that I had not been completely erased, that I still existed despite their best efforts. Speech balloon, the tension is killing you, isn't it? Smash that subscribe button because the will reading in the next chapter is explosive. Comment below, what do you think Sterling put in that will? Drop your predictions, let's see who gets it right. You absolutely cannot miss what happens next. Tuesday morning arrived with overcast skies and a penetrating cold that seemed to seep into my very bones as I made my way downtown. I wore the same gray Goodwill dress I'd worn to meet Gregory months earlier because it was literally the only professional clothing I owned that wasn't threadbare or stained. Donovan and Cecilia were already seated when I arrived at the conference room, along with several other people I didn't recognize, probably Apex Industries executives, board members, and attorneys ready to watch Donovan inherit everything he believed was rightfully his. Gregory Ashworth greeted everyone formally and began with standard legal preliminaries about the estate, the size of which was breathtaking: $40 million in assets including Apex Industries, valued at $32 million, plus real estate holdings, investment portfolios, and personal property. Donovan leaned back in his chair with barely concealed satisfaction, already mentally spending his inheritance. He glanced at me once with an expression of such smug triumph that I had to look away, focusing instead on my trembling hands folded in my lap. "Before I read the formal will," Gregory said, his voice carrying unexpected gravity that made everyone suddenly pay closer attention, "I must first read a personal letter that Mr. Hartford wrote by hand 6 weeks before his death. He specifically instructed that this letter be read aloud in its entirety before any other documents are reviewed." He pulled out several pages of what was clearly Sterling's handwriting. I recognized it immediately after 32 years of marriage. My heart began pounding so hard I felt dizzy, and I watched Donovan's confident expression flicker with the first shadow of uncertainty. Gregory cleared his throat and began, "To all present at this reading, and most especially to my son Donovan. I am writing this letter because I have spent the final months of my life confronting truths I spent 20 years running from, and I refuse to die without attempting to correct the terrible wrongs I've committed. I am not a good man. I was not a good husband. And I have utterly failed as a father because I raised you, Donovan, to be exactly like me, cruel, ungrateful, and willing to erase the people who sacrificed everything for your success." The room went completely silent except for Gregory's measured voice reading Sterling's confession. Donovan's face had gone pale, his earlier smugness replaced by dawning confusion and the first hints of fear. Cecilia reached for his hand, but he pulled away, transfixed by Gregory's reading. I sat frozen, barely breathing, unable to process what I was hearing from beyond the grave. The woman sitting in this room, Annalise Hartford, was the foundation of everything I built. While I engineered products and closed deals, she managed every operational detail that made Apex Industries possible in those critical early years. She did payroll when we couldn't afford a bookkeeper. She answered phones, managed inventory, created filing systems, negotiated with suppliers, and kept us solvent when I would have failed spectacularly. Gregory continued reading Sterling's words as my eyes filled with tears I'd held back for 2 decades. "When I left her for a younger woman because my ego couldn't handle growing old gracefully, I didn't just betray our marriage, I rewrote our history. I let my expensive divorce attorneys paint her as a lazy homemaker when she was actually an essential partner who never received credit, compensation, or even basic recognition for her contributions." Speech balloon, are you crying yet? Hit that like button if your heart is breaking for Annalise. Subscribe and comment justice if you're ready to see Donovan's world fall apart. The next part of this letter will absolutely destroy him. I promise you're not ready for what comes next. Keep watching. Gregory continued reading Sterling's letter, and every word felt like vindication washing over wounds that had festered for 20 years in silence and shame. But my greatest sin wasn't betraying Annalise, it was poisoning my son against her to justify my own cruelty and cowardice. "Donovan, I deliberately lied to you about your mother from the moment I left. I told you she was lazy when she worked harder than anyone I've ever known. I told you she contributed nothing when she built the operational foundation of Apex Industries with her own hands, without pay or recognition or gratitude." Donovan had gone from pale to completely ashen, his hands gripping the armrests of his leather chair so tightly his knuckles were bone white. Cecilia stared at him with growing alarm as his entire worldview visibly crumbled sentence by sentence. Gregory's voice never wavered as he delivered Sterling's posthumous confession: "I bought your loyalty with money, cars, education, and an executive position you didn't earn. I taught you to measure worth only in dollars and status. I encouraged you to look down on your mother because acknowledging her value meant confronting my own monstrous behavior and insufferable selfishness. I know about the phone call, Donovan, when your mother had cancer and begged you for $15,000 to literally save her life. My breath caught in my throat. I had never told anyone about that call, never spoken about that ultimate betrayal to a single living soul. How did Sterling know? My assistant overheard your side of that conversation. You refused to help your own mother survive cancer because I had taught you so well that she was worthless, that helping her would be throwing good money after bad. Do you understand what kind of monster that makes you? What kind of monster that makes me for creating you in my image? Gregory paused, letting those words sink into the suffocating silence of the conference room before continuing. I am dying, and I finally understand that all the money I accumulated, all the business success I achieved, means absolutely nothing if the cost was my humanity and my son's soul. Annalise, I know I cannot undo 20 years of cruelty. I cannot give you back the life I stole, the dignity I destroyed, or the son I turned against you. But I can attempt the smallest gesture of justice, inadequate though it is. To Donovan, you will receive $5 from my estate. Not as punishment, exactly, but as a symbol. $5 to buy yourself a cup of coffee and sit somewhere quiet to think about what truly matters in life. Think about the woman who gave birth to you, raised you with love, and sacrificed everything for your well-being. Think about the day you told that woman she wasn't worth saving. Think about whether the man staring back at you from the mirror is someone you're actually proud to be. Donovan made a strangled sound, standing halfway up from his chair before collapsing back down, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. To Annalise Hartford, I leave everything else. The entirety of my estate, including 100% ownership of Apex Industries, all real estate holdings, all investment accounts, and all personal property, goes to you. You earned it in the years when we were actually partners. You deserved it in the divorce you never received justice from. And you need it now after I condemned you to 20 years of poverty and erasure while your son lived in luxury built partially on your unacknowledged labor. Gregory's voice finally wavered slightly as he finished. I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope this final act brings you some measure of peace and security in whatever years you have remaining. You deserved so much better than you got from me. Sterling Hartford, December 2023. Speech balloon. Oh my God. Did that just happen? Subscribe immediately because the next chapter shows Donovan's complete meltdown. Comment karma is real if this gave you chills. Share this with everyone who needs to see what happens when you treat people like trash. Don't go anywhere, the aftermath is incredible. The silence that followed Gregory's final words was absolutely deafening, broken only by the sound of Donovan's ragged breathing and Cecilia's shocked whisper of "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God," repeated like some horrified prayer. I couldn't move, couldn't process the magnitude of what had just happened, couldn't reconcile the fact that Sterling, cruel, selfish Sterling, had actually done this thing. $40 million. Everything. Mine. After 2 decades of struggling to pay rent, clipping coupons, wearing thrift store clothes, and being treated like human garbage by my own flesh and blood. Gregory set down the letter with solemn finality and picked up the actual will document, his tone returning to its professional cadence. The last will and testament of Sterling Marcus Hartford, executed December 15, 2023, witnessed and notarized, declares as follows: I hereby bequeath to my son, Donovan Matthew Hartford, the sum of $5 and nothing more. All remaining assets of my estate, with no exceptions or limitations, pass entirely to my ex-wife, Annalise Catherine Hartford, effective immediately upon my death and the completion of probate proceedings. Donovan exploded from his chair so violently it toppled backward and crashed against the wall with a tremendous bang that made everyone jump. This is insane. You can't be serious. He was dying, he was drugged, he didn't know what he was doing. His voice cracked between rage and panic, his perfectly styled hair falling forward as he leaned both palms on the conference table, breathing like he just ran a marathon. I'll contest this. I'll drag this through every court in Washington state. There's no way this will hold up legally. He was clearly mentally incompetent when he wrote this ridiculous document. Gregory remained infuriatingly calm, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp as he addressed Donovan's outburst with devastating professional precision. Mr. Hartford anticipated this exact reaction, which is why he underwent 3 separate psychiatric evaluations in November and December, all confirming his complete mental competence and testamentary capacity. I have those evaluation reports here, all from board-certified psychiatrists with impeccable credentials. Additionally, we have video recordings of him discussing his intentions while clearly lucid and explaining in detail his reasoning for these specific bequests. I assure you this will is completely ironclad and legally unassailable. Donovan turned on me then, his face contorted with rage and something that looked almost like betrayal, as if I had somehow orchestrated this reversal. You did this. Somehow you manipulated him when he was weak and dying. You probably seduced him or drugged him but Gregory cut him off sharply. Mr. Hartford, I must caution you against making defamatory statements. Your father initiated this process entirely independently, and your mother had no knowledge of these arrangements until this very moment. She met with me once, at your father's request, to answer questions about the early years of Apex Industries, but she knew nothing about the will's contents. I finally found my voice, though it came out shaky and barely above a whisper. Donovan, I didn't know. I swear to you I had no idea Sterling was going to do this. My son, no, this stranger who happened to share my DNA, looked at me with such pure hatred that it physically hurt worse than any of his previous cruelty. Don't talk to me. Don't ever talk to me again. You've destroyed everything, taken everything that was rightfully mine, everything Dad and I built together. The irony of those words coming from someone who had just heard his father's detailed confession apparently escaped him completely in his fury and fear. Cecilia gathered her designer handbag and stood on shaking legs, pulling at Donovan's arm. We need to leave. We need to call our attorney immediately. This can't be happening, there has to be something we can do. They stumbled toward the door while Gregory called after them, Mr. Hartford, we'll need to schedule a time to transfer company access, discuss transition procedures, and handle the logistics of your departure from Apex Industries. You remain employed there currently, but as Mrs. Annalise Hartford now owns the company entirely, your continued employment will be at her sole discretion and pleasure. Donovan slammed the door so hard the framed diplomas rattled on the walls. I cannot believe what just happened. Hit subscribe and turn on all notifications because it shows what Annalise does with her $40 million, and trust me, it's perfect. Comment whether you think she should fire Donovan or give him another chance. The ending will blow your mind. Keep watching. I sat alone in that conference room for nearly 20 minutes after Donovan and Cecilia fled, just breathing and trying to comprehend the seismic shift that had just occurred in my reality. Gregory gave me space, working quietly at his desk in the corner while I processed everything. Finally, he approached gently and said, Mrs. Hartford, I know this is overwhelming, but we need to discuss next steps. You now control a $40 million enterprise with 230 employees depending on leadership decisions. Apex Industries' board of directors is expecting communication within 48 hours about the ownership transition and strategic direction moving forward. The next 6 weeks were the most surreal and exhausting of my entire life as I went from poverty to controlling a massive manufacturing empire overnight. Gregory connected me with financial advisors, corporate attorneys, and management consultants who helped me understand the scope of what I'd inherited. Apex Industries was thriving, profitable, and well-managed by a competent executive team that had been running daily operations largely independently of Sterling's direct involvement during his final illness. My role, they explained, was strategic oversight, not operational management, which was fortunate because I knew nothing about industrial equipment manufacturing. I moved from my studio apartment in Tacoma to a modest but comfortable townhouse in a safe Seattle neighborhood, nothing extravagant or ostentatious, just a clean 3-bedroom home with a small garden where I could finally breathe without fear of eviction or utility shutoffs. I bought a reliable used Honda, not a Mercedes or BMW, because I couldn't shake decades of frugal habits developed from desperate necessity. I paid off all my medical debt from the cancer treatment, crying tears of profound relief as I wrote those checks and freed myself from that crushing burden I'd carried for years. But the most important decision I had to make concerned Donovan and Apex Industries. The board recommended immediate termination. He had no actual ownership stake, his employment was at will, and his behavior at the will reading had been witnessed by multiple executives who found it disturbing and unprofessional. My attorneys drafted termination paperwork citing insubordination and workplace misconduct. All I had to do was sign, and Donovan would be escorted from the building by security, his access revoked, his career at the company finished in spectacular public failure and humiliation. I held that unsigned termination letter for 3 days, staring at it in my new home office, wrestling with 20 years of hurt, anger, and betrayal against the undeniable truth that Donovan was still my son, still the little boy I'd rocked to sleep in bandaged scraped knees for. Sterling's letter had made clear that Donovan's cruelty was learned behavior, deliberately taught by a father who weaponized wealth and status against basic human decency. Was my son completely lost, or was there some part of him that could be reached, could be saved, could be taught to value things beyond money and power? I called Gregory and asked him to arrange a private meeting with Donovan, just the two of us, before I made any final decisions about his employment. Gregory strongly advised against it, citing emotional manipulation risks and legal liability concerns. But I insisted because I needed to try one last time to reach whatever part of my son might still exist underneath Sterling's poisonous conditioning. If there was nothing left to save, at least I would know I tried. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday in my new office at Apex Industries headquarters, the corner office that used to belong to Sterling, now mine by legal right and cosmic justice. Speech balloon: what would you do? Fire him or give him one more chance? Subscribe now and comment your honest opinion. The final chapter reveals Annalise's decision, and you will not believe how this story ends. Hit that like button if this story has absolutely gripped you. One chapter left. Don't miss it. Donovan arrived at my office exactly on time, and I barely recognized him, not physically, but in his demeanor, his energy, the way he held himself like a man who'd been fundamentally broken and was trying to figure out how to reassemble the pieces into something different. He wore a simple suit, not his usual designer armor, and his eyes were red-rimmed from what looked like genuine sleeplessness. We sat across from each other in the same chairs where Sterling used to interview executives, and for several long minutes, neither of us spoke a word. Finally, I broke the silence. I brought you here because I need to tell you something important before I make my final decision about your future at this company and in my life. You were right about one thing in all your cruelty. I'm not a successful businesswoman, I'm not brilliant or innovative, and I didn't build Apex Industries the way your father did. But you were catastrophically wrong about everything else, and your father's letter proved that. I was essential. I was valuable. I mattered. And you treated me like human garbage because he taught you that money determines worth and poverty equals failure. Donovan's face crumpled, and for the first time since he was maybe 12 years old, I saw my son actually cry, not manipulative tears or performative emotion, but genuine grief and shame pouring out of him in broken sobs. Mom, I can't. Everything I believed was a lie. Everything Dad told me, everything I based my entire identity on, was just his justification for being a monster. And I became exactly like him. I told you that you weren't worth saving when you had cancer. What kind of person does that? What kind of son refuses to help his own mother survive? His voice shattered completely on those last words, and he buried his face in his hands. I let him cry for several minutes, feeling my own tears sliding down my cheeks as I watched my son finally confronting the terrible truth about who he'd become and who had made him that way. Your father took responsibility for poisoning you against me, and that letter was his attempt at redemption. Now you have a choice, Donovan. You can contest this will, spend years in bitter litigation, destroy whatever relationship we might salvage, and probably lose anyway because Sterling made this ironclad. Or you can accept this painful lesson, learn from it, and become someone different, someone better than either Sterling or the man he raised you to be. I'm not going to fire you, I said, watching his head snap up in shock. But I'm also not going to leave you in your executive position where you wield power you haven't earned and don't deserve. Here's my offer: you will take a position as a junior analyst in operations at $55,000 annually, the same starting salary we offer recent college graduates. You'll work your way up based entirely on merit, competence, and character, not name, not connections, not inheritance. You'll learn this business from the ground up, understand what real work looks like, and prove whether you have actual value beyond your last name. Donovan stared at me in disbelief. That's an 85% pay cut from what I was making. I'll have to sell my penthouse, my cars, everything. Cecilia will probably leave me when she realizes we can't maintain that lifestyle anymore. His voice carried no anger now, just dawning realization of consequences. I nodded slowly. Yes, you'll have to live modestly like I did for 20 years. And if Cecilia leaves you because you're not rich anymore, then she was never the right partner anyway. This is about discovering who you actually are when you strip away all of Sterling's money and conditioning. Do you accept? After a long, trembling silence, Donovan whispered, I accept. And Mom, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know saying sorry doesn't even begin to cover what I've done. But I am so sorry for everything. For the cancer call, for the cruelty, for erasing you, for becoming someone you couldn't even recognize as your son. I want to try to be better. I want to try to become someone you might someday be proud of, even though I have no right to ask for that. I stood up and walked around the desk, and for the first time in 20 years, I embraced my son while he cried against my shoulder. 6 months have passed since that day, and I want to tell you what's happened since, because this story isn't just about inheritance or revenge, it's about redemption and rebuilding. Donovan works in operations now, arriving at 7 a.m. and leaving at 6 p.m., learning supply chain management and production scheduling alongside people half his age who initially resented him but gradually came to respect his genuine humility and work ethic. Cecilia did leave him, just as he predicted, unable to accept a middle-class lifestyle after years of luxury. He sold his penthouse and moved into a modest apartment not unlike the one I lived in for so many years. I've used Sterling's fortune not for revenge or luxury, but for purpose and healing. I fully funded the community cancer treatment center that helped save my life, endowing it with $5 million so that no one ever has to choose between bankruptcy and survival like I did. I established a scholarship fund at community colleges for older students returning to education after divorce or hardship. I increased wages across Apex Industries by 15% and improved benefits for all employees because I remember what it's like to struggle on inadequate pay. And I brought Donovan to volunteer with me at a homeless shelter every Saturday, where he serves meals to people experiencing the poverty and invisibility I lived with for 2 decades. Last week, Donovan came to Sunday dinner at my townhouse, something we now do weekly, slowly rebuilding a relationship that was destroyed by Sterling's poison and money's corruption. As we washed dishes together afterward, he said something I'll never forget. Mom, I used to measure success by bank accounts and status. But watching you transform Dad's fortune into impact, watching you treat people with dignity he never showed anyone, watching you give me a second chance I absolutely didn't deserve, that's what real success looks like. I'm sorry it took losing everything for me to finally see what you tried to teach me my entire childhood before Dad bought my soul. I'm 73 years old now, wealthy beyond anything I ever imagined, reunited with my son who's learning to be human again, and finally at peace with the painful journey that brought me here. Sterling's deathbed confession couldn't undo 20 years of cruelty, but it gave me justice and gave Donovan the chance to choose a different path forward. That $5 bill is framed on Donovan's apartment wall, a permanent reminder that true value has nothing to do with money and everything to do with character, compassion, and who you choose to become when you finally face the truth about yourself. Sometimes karma takes decades, but when it arrives, it's absolutely perfect. If this story moved you, please subscribe and share it with everyone who needs to hear this message. Comment below, what's the most powerful lesson you learned from Annalise's story? Have you ever had to choose between revenge and redemption? Drop a red heart if you believe people can change and a broken heart if you think Donovan got off too easy. Thank you for watching this entire journey with me, your support means everything. Check out my next story in the playlist, and remember, your worth is never determined by someone else's cruelty or the balance in your bank account. Real success is measured in character, not dollars. God bless you all.